And welcome into another episode of the Marriage Talk podcast. It is great to have you with us. Thank you for subscribing and sharing the link with other couples in your life. And by the way, don't forget, we have a YouTube channel and we would love to see you subscribe to that. It's been happening slowly over the course of the past few weeks, but every episode of the podcast is also available now in video form. Bill Hobson here, along with Jay and Laura LaFoon. You can find out all sorts of information about them at jayandlaura.com. And you can find every episode of Marriage Talk that we've ever done at marriagetalk.org. I'm reminded, Jay and Laura, at the outset of our conversation today, that I was just listening to a podcast with one of my favorite comedians, who ironically is an atheist, go figure. And his special guest for like 45 minutes was Jeff Allen, who was our guest just a few weeks ago. So it's kind of fun to see some of our Marriage Talk guests doing some other things and getting their message out to an audience that might not otherwise engage with it. And
hopefully Jeff rubbed off a little bit on your atheist friend there.
I hope so too. They had a very interesting conversation, to say the least. This conversation that we're about to have touches on a concept that was developed a few decades ago. And I'm not sure, you guys are certainly more deeply immersed in this than I am. I'm not sure there's been a concept more impactful in marriage than the concept of the 5 love languages. Why don't you fill us in on a little backstory, and then we'll kind of get into the practical application of it all.
It's definitely immersed in every aspect of life. I think we were watching some sitcom, probably.
And they were talking about the love
and they said something about love languages. I was like, oh, they're talking about the love language. And then we were watching another drama on TV, and it was about a married couple. And they started talking about, we've got to learn the love languages. That's how we have to help our marriage. And I was like, there it is again. It is immersed immensely in culture.
And the backstory is quite cool. Dr. Gary Chapman, author of the book, he released that book. He's 85, and he released that book when he was 52 years old.
Wow.
And so 3 decades it's been around. However, it didn't get traction for the first 3 or 4 years. And I'm not sure how it finally got traction, but and we're so happy for Gary. It's now been translated into over 40 languages, and every language that it's translated into, it becomes that language's bestseller for that year. So the impact is worldwide. The truths found in that book are universal. I mean, if they're saying it in Russian and German and Austrian and whatever, it's working. And it came out of his work at his church, where he was the counseling pastor. And so he really, you got to understand, Gary is such a gentleman. He's such a strong Christian. And I can just picture this. He said he always, when he counseled, he took copious notes. That doesn't surprise me at all. It's just the kind of guy he is. And then he went back, and as he reviewed his notes, he began to notice these patterns of what it was that people were either lacking or getting from their spouse. And so the love languages emerged.
And basically, love languages, if you have never heard of it, or maybe you've heard of it, but you don't really understand what it's all about. It's about speaking your spouse's love language. The way I accept love and feel love is very different than the way Jay accepts and feels love and gives love. We give love differently, and it's all based upon these love languages.
So basically there's 5: acts of service, quality time, gifts, words of affirmation, and physical touch. And I gave those in the order that my wife likes things.
You did. I wasn't listening.
The last one being physical touch. Pray for me.
Oh, that's funny. Well, so when you see something that has the staying power of this concept, and at some point down the road, we are hoping to have Dr. Chapman come on. But when he's in the process of writing it, you never really know if it's going to kind of change the world in many respects. But he certainly and clearly touched on some really important concepts, because all too often, well-intentioned efforts could be aimed at the wrong target between spouses. Is that a fair way of kind of setting the table for why it's important to know which language is yours?
I'll give you a perfect example.
Okay, go ahead.
I was a youth speaker for a number of years and would go away for weekends, especially in the wintertime, for weekend retreats. And I would leave Friday afternoon and come home Sunday afternoon. And I distinctly remember coming home on a Sunday afternoon, and I had been gone probably 4 or 5 weekends in a row. And Laura had this wonderful meal prepared. And my primary love language, one of my primary love languages, is acts of service. So I want to serve in order to show you that I love you. Hers is quality time. So she prepares this meal. We eat this meal. As soon as we're done, what do I start doing? I stand up and I start clearing the table to go do the dishes, because I'm going to serve my wife, because I want to tell her, oh, I love you, I love you, I love you. Well, what she's hearing is, you don't want to spend time with me. You'd rather do something that, and so she was like, no, sit down. I haven't seen you for 3 days. Let's spend some quality time together. So I was trying to say I love you, but she was not hearing I love you. She was actually hearing the opposite, because of her, the way she gives and receives love. And I think all too often in marriage, we speak our love language, and we don't realize that our spouse might not be hearing I love you the way that we're saying I love you.
That's exactly what it's all about, is we naturally speak the language of love that we need to hear. We naturally do that because it's innate in us. And so, and actually everybody has a dominant and then a one, not, so I don't know what that word is. Secondary. So you probably speak 2 love languages, but your spouse also speaks 2, and more often than not, they're not the same. And so that's part of what's miscommunicated, is we're not speaking the same language because we're speaking the language we want to hear, and our spouse needs to hear it totally differently. And so it really is.
So for example, my love languages are acts of service and words of affirmation. So I'm gonna vacuum the rugs, and then I want to hear Laura say, oh, they look so good, Jay. They look so good.
Unfortunately, Laura's spiritual gift is sarcasm, so he doesn't hear that very often.
Is that one of the 5? I just
No, that's my extra. Talk to Gary about it.
Laura's love languages are quality time and gifts. So she will constantly say to me, you want to go get a cup of coffee? And what she's not saying, are you thirsty for coffee, or do you want to leave the house and go get coffee? She's saying,
because we can make our own coffee.
Do you want to? Yeah, we can make our own coffee at home. She's saying, do you want to spend some time with me, because that's how I feel loved. Or when I get her flowers for no reason, it's not our anniversary, it's not her birthday, but I just show up with flowers. She's like, wow, that really makes me feel loved because you thought of me and brought those home. Now, interestingly, in our marriage, neither one of us, physical touch is not really strong for either one of us. Now,
yes, early on
when we first read this book, I was probably 30 or 32 years old.
I don't even know if you were that old.
And I'm like, bingo, I am physical touch. I am physical touch. I am physical touch. No, I just like sex. I mean, that's all there was to it. And so you have to look at,
because physical touch has nothing to do with sex.
Right.
It's all about affection.
You're a hugger. You like to hold hands.
You're one of these type of people.
Well, they can't see that on the podcast.
Oh, that's true. You're one of these people.
You're touchy-feely.
You like to hold
on the
hands.
YouTube channel, they can see it.
Yeah. And so when we read it the second time, which was probably 10 or 15 years later, we realized, you're not physical.
I'm just a man.
Because we don't sit and hold hands. I don't know. Maybe we're just weird or different. I don't know. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting when you see a couple that's clearly been married for a lot of years. They're in their 80s and they are walking down the hallway, or they're sitting in church, and you can see them still holding hands. And obviously they have figured out that this is part of their love language that they share. But I'm intrigued by the concept that you covered just a moment ago, which is it's entirely possible for me to sincerely be acting out of my love language towards my wife, and then being a little frustrated that she doesn't seem to appreciate or understand what it is I'm doing here. And it's because we've hit a translation barrier.
Exactly. You're speaking Spanish.
I'm speaking my language.
Right. She's speaking Portuguese, whatever.
It reminds me of a friend of ours who was a missionary in Papua New Guinea, and he came back to America to speak to our church, and they were on their furlough, and he finished talking about how they were in this very remote village, and part of what they were doing for New Tribes Ministries, missions at that time, was translating the Bible into the language of this tribe that had no written words, no language, anything. And after the service, one of the older gentlemen from the church came up to him, and he still tells us this story. He laughs when he tells it to us. The guy came up to him and said, "Wouldn't it just be a lot easier if you taught them all English?" And my missionary friend's like, well, they have their own language.
Right.
So it's not up to us to change their language. It's up to us to take the message into their language.
Their culture. You gotta get it into their culture.
Yeah, they're unlikely to just switch all of a sudden. So that's what it reminded me of when you're kind of talking past each other. When we're thinking about quality time, let's help define that a little bit, because it's not literally just being in the same room, or it's not literally just being in the same vehicle for 7 hours. It's possible to make a long drive together and it not be quality time at all. What does quality time look like?
I would say quality time is doing something together that I'm trying to think, because Jay thinks quality time is working together, and that's not working together. He thinks that my quality time should be met all the time because we're together 24/7. I'm like, no, working together is not quality time. Going to exercise together, that could be bordering on quality time. Golfing together is definitely quality time. We're doing something together that we're having conversation, we're enjoying a hobby, even when we cook together, that's quality time.
I would
but
say
working together is not quality time.
Shared activity without an agenda.
Yeah, that's a good way. Yeah,
You know,
he's better with definitions.
I'm going to do this with you because I want to be with you, because I know that speaks a lot to you. And one of the big destroyers, in my opinion, it crushes people whose love language is quality time, is when you get on your device in the middle of that activity.
Yeah.
Because you're then saying you're not important.
Mm-hmm.
Whoever's on my device is more important. And so there's no perfect way to do it, but really to shared time without an agenda. Let's go for coffee.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go for a walk. Oh my goodness, if we could go for a walk every day, she'd be in heaven. Just stuff.
Jay doesn't like to walk.
Just stuff like that.
That's boring.
Now, I like a good walk spoiled, which is golf. So there we go. But
I'm reminded back a few weeks ago when we had Joey Odom on the program. He's the technology guru, and his focus is on how to break ourselves from the addiction to technology. And one of the things that he said was that when I have this device in my hand, 300 million people can reach me. When I put it down, only you can reach me.
That's quality time.
Yeah, it's really
it's right there.
Let's dig into another one. Words of affirmation. Now, there's a number of different ways for me to, depending on the inflection in my voice, to say the words, "That was great," right?
Affirmation being the key word here.
But I'm just saying, in written form, it could look really good. But you can say, like, "That was great," a number of ways. And some of those ways are not words of affirmation. What does, for somebody whose love language is that, what do those words do for them? And what do they sound like?
Well, it has to be bathed in sincerity. She can't roll her eyes while she's saying it. She can't be going, yeah, with her hand while she's saying it. It has to be.
And he can't. It doesn't work if he has to ask for the words of affirmation.
Honey, did you see what I did?
That doesn't work either.
No, that doesn't work either. And it also doesn't work if it's followed with the word but.
No commas at the end of it.
No, it's got to be a period with maybe even an exclamation point. And I think what it does for someone like me, because it is that is my primary, is words of affirmation. I would go back to my family of origin. I'm firstborn son, firstborn grandson, firstborn great grandson. And so what was I?
Translation, firstborn golden child.
Yes. But what words were always said to me, because I was the first one to do it? "We're so proud of you. I'm so proud of you.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my goodness, what a good boy." And
you're so cute.
Yeah, I think that's ingrained in you. as that young child, you don't know that this is, not part of everyday life. And then when you get people, I just refuse to be around negative people. And I know that's not always Christ-like, because they need Jesus for sure, but they just hurt too much. I've got a friend, I almost stopped playing golf with him because of the comments he would make that were just, it was him trying to be funny, but he wasn't funny at all. And so I think for words of affirmation, people.
I'm funny. My sarcasm is it's not
Yeah.
negative.
Yeah, didn't you hear me laugh when I said that, Jay? I think for words of affirmation, people, others don't know how much words can hurt or heal, or uplift or downtrodden. And so I think for words, people, it really is it's an emotional thing.
Yeah. I can remember when I was in high school and really trying to delve into what it meant to follow Jesus. One of the verses that I kept coming back to was Ephesians 4:29. Let no unwholesome word proceed from your mouth except for that which is given for building up other people. And I was like, dang, I don't do that very well. And I really, I really try. I mean, that verse is always in the back of my head, but unfortunately the words come out sometimes before the verse pops in my head. But yeah, it really is. How can you build, if your spouse has words of affirmation as a love language, you have to constantly be looking for those opportunities, especially if it's not something that comes naturally, which it does not come naturally for me I'm not a negative person. I'm a positive person, but I'm not a natural, I'm going to thank you, I'm going to appreciate you. That doesn't come natural for me.
Suck it up, buttercup is really a better phrase that comes out of her mouth.
I did use those words with him yesterday. Suck it up, buttercup.
When I go through the list of the 5, I'm reminded that most of them are direct one-on-one opportunities for spouses to speak to each other in whatever language that they prefer. But this one with the words, I think, could also be how you speak about your spouse to other people, and knowing that you're not demeaning or being demeaned just for the sake of your husband trying to look cool to his buddies, right? The old lady, the ball and chain, the whatever, or her complaining to her group of friends about you, especially if those things get back around, because that could be just devastating to a spouse to hear. Well, I don't know, I was out with Bill last week, and he kind of said that, this is. I think those words of affirmation need to be spoken not just directly to each other, but in any opportunity you have in reference to your spouse. You've got, I think, a responsibility, but also an opportunity to set the example and to show that, hey, we're not playing any games here. This is truly a partnership or the kind of teamwork that a lot of marriages are missing out on. Is that fair to take it from just the two of us to our circles of influence as well?
I completely agree with that. And also the converse of that is true, because you get a lot of spouses who will talk great about their spouse in public. Oh, my wife, she's gorgeous. She's beautiful. She's such a sweetheart, but never tell her. Literally had a couple close to us. She divorced him because she said, you never tell me I'm pretty. You never tell me that you love me. You never. And he said to us through tears after the divorce, I was always telling my friends, I was always telling my coworkers, but I never told her.
Wow.
And so really to be careful with that on both sides, because you can really do great encouragement. I'll never forget when Laura started really cooking like a gourmet, and we were at a church potluck, and someone said, who made these gourmet frittatas? And I said, that would be my wife. And I was just beaming. She knew nothing of it, but I was beaming because I was like, that's my wife, and it really can be an enhancer to your relationship.
Let's touch a little bit on the last one on physical touch, so that we can add some definition to it, because I think the default assumption is that it just relates to sex directly. Why does it matter if I've got my arm around, or if I'm holding hands, or shoulder rubs or whatever? Why does that matter? How could that possibly speak love language into somebody's life?
Security. Just a sense of security, a sense of you care enough to hold me, especially for people with physical touch, I think it's especially important at the high times of life and the low times of life. I mean, it's important all the time, but like when things are going really great, to give that hug, to give that, firm handshake if you're not comfortable with a hug, pat them on the back, and especially for those who are at a low point, to hold them, to comfort them, to just give them that sense that it's going to be okay and you're secure with me. You can cry with me. You can have whatever emotion with me, and I'm not going to judge you.
I think there's just some people that are just naturally, the phrase I use is touchy-feely. They're just touchy-feely people. They like to be connected to a person via physical touch. And it might just be, I think of, there's a gentleman that's on a committee that he's just a hugger. He just comes in, he hugs everybody, and and that's just the way he says hello, is to hug everybody. I'm like, hello. Here I am, don't get in my bubble. But yeah, he's just a huggy person, and you just kind of know that. And so my guess would be that his love language, one of them, is physical touch, because that's the way he shows love to people. He's always patting people on the back and shaking their hands and giving them hugs. And so my guess would be his love language would be physical touch.
One of our best friends, he's a plumbing and heating contractor, and he will give you the handshake of a handshake. I mean, he will, it's a vice grip handshake. But in church on Sundays, he walks around to all of the widows and he gives them a kiss on the cheek. Wow. And just a hey, here's a little hug and a kiss on the cheek. So he's a manly man, but he also, that's him saying, I love you, we're glad you're here, that kind of thing. So I think it is, for some people, it's just, this is how I express it, because he's not a words person by any stretch of the imagination, but he is a lover of people.
I think about the power of a kind, gentle touch for someone who maybe was brought up with the exact opposite, right? Maybe it was a rough household. Maybe dad had the strap out, or maybe it was worse than that along the way. And what it would mean to that person to know that touch can be kind, it can be compassionate, it can be loving. And I would hope that after a long time, perhaps together, that spouses would come to trust each other to that point where you're relearning what touch is supposed to be like as part of a love language. And it kind of brings to mind an overarching question on this entire topic. And it's one that Dr. Chapman's been speaking on for decades, and you folks have been doing the same thing. And that is, how do we figure out which one is my spouse's? Maybe I can define mine. I'm still not sure that I could pin down exactly 1 and 2 in my world, but how on earth? I'm trying to figure out everything. How am I going to figure this one out? What's the pathway?
Well, thankfully, there is a 5 Love Languages free online assessment that you can go online, you answer the questions, and Dr. Chapman said, he was joking, of course. He said, boy, if I had just had a nickel for every one of those free assessments we gave out, he said, but
and easy, you can take the assessment, obviously. I think it's 5lovelanguages.com, but just search it. But you can also, if you ask yourself, what is it that when my spouse does this for me, I hear I love you? And for me, that's when Jay takes me out for a meal, when he gives me special gifts. And again, the gifts doesn't necessarily
have to be expensive.
It's just, it's just
I saw this and I thought of you.
Yeah, it's just the thought. It doesn't even have to be something that you buy,
So you better know when dandelion season comes along. I saw these and thought of you, honey.
But so what is it that, and then just tell your spouse, here's what speaks love to me. And then when your spouse says it, you're going to find out, because like Jay said, when he got up and did the dishes that day, I was like, why are you doing the dishes? And he's like, well, because I thought that was what you needed me to do. No, I need you to sit down here and let's just have some conversation, because I don't need him to do the dishes. When he does acts of service, that doesn't really mean, but when I do the dishes for him, or not for him, but when I do the dishes and I do the laundry and I help do this and help do that, that's an act of service for him. And so
and what's interesting with that is she doesn't even have to do the whole thing. But if she sees me doing something and says, how can I help? Or one of the best gifts she's ever given me is she's basically said, I'm doing dishes. I don't want you to do dishes. I think it's because I do them wrong, but she still doesn't want me to do dishes. But Gary Chapman will tell you that his wife, he says this from stage. He's such a genteel man. You can't believe it. He said, nothing turns my wife on more than me running a vacuum cleaner. She sees me pushing that vacuum cleaner and she's like, what? Have I got a gift for you? I mean, so it really is. When you find your spouse's love language, or if they have two, and most do have two, and you begin to speak it, it's not an instant win for the marriage, but it's an instant win for that moment. And you build on those wins and build on those wins.
And it will become a win for the marriage when you start speaking your spouse's love language. And it is hard because you have natural tendencies your way, but now you have, because it's very hard for me to speak words of affirmation, but I try really hard. I have to actually stop and think about it, which sounds like, okay, why would you have to do that? Aren't you older now that you can figure out? No. I have to stop and go, I should probably acknowledge that whatever. And so yeah, it does.
Just yesterday she said, you don't sweat much for a fat man.
I'm
like,
not.
That was such a nice compliment.
We call that a complisult. It's got two things built into it, right? The compliment and the insult all rolled into one. I don't know why it's so hard though. I will tell a complete stranger, thank you for holding the door. Or if the server at the table brings me a glass of water, I say thank you 100 times out of 100. And yet within our own home, I don't do that nearly as often as I should. I don't know why that's so hard. What is this intrinsic barrier that we have to expressing appreciation to our spouses?
I don't know that we definitely think about it being hard. It's just we take each other for granted. Don't you just know that? Well, of course I appreciate when you do that. I mean, because it's like this. This is going to be a roundabout illustration, but Jay's mom right now is going through stage 4 cancer, radiation treatment for stage 4 cancer. And man, we get her to the house. I mean, when we get to the house to pick her up, she is bemoaning and blah, I don't want to go. And she's whining and everything. We walk in that doctor's office and she's like, good morning. How is everybody today? It's because you're out and about with people you're not normally with. So you put on a good show, for lack of a better word. So when you say thank you to the person who brings you, your beverage at the restaurant or whatever, it's because you're out and about and you're putting on a good show, for lack of a better word. But when you're home, oh, okay, I don't have to be on show anymore. I don't have to be on, like, yeah, I love you. I appreciate it. Yeah, but they need to hear it. They're human beings.
I got a good friend, Bill, that did not get married till he was 42. And by the time he was 45, he was the parent of twin girls and a boy. So in that short three years, married, learning that, and then parenthood, he said, I always thought for all these years before I got married that if I just came home after work at a decent time, I would be fine. My kid, I'd spend time with the wife and the kids. And he said, no, I found that when I got home from work, he's a pastor, by the way. He said, I am so emotionally spent that I have nothing left in the tank for my family. He said, so I had to intentionally keep something in the tank for my family. And I think that's why we take each other for granted. We've spent ourselves during the day being kind and courteous to everybody else. And that's important. That's vitally important. But we've got to save something in the tank for our spouse.
Well, as we wind down our time, let's do a couple of takeaways. And I'd like you to kind of bring some advice on the best way to discover your spouse's love language. Is it literally to run down the list and say, which one of these sounds best to you? Or is it just through experience that we kind of learn these things? I
would say to sit down and have a conversation that you say, okay, Jay, what is it that I do that that I love you? And when he answers, that'll give you a little bit of a clue into what their love language is. Okay, Laura, what is it that when I do it, you feel love? That'll give you a little bit of a clue. It sounds very simple and it might be a little more, well, I really love it when, I think it really is simple. Well, I really love it when you help me give the kids a bath, or when I don't have to ask you to give the kids a bath. That's an acts of service. You know, I really love it when we sit and watch TV together at night and you hold my hand. Now you might have some quality time and some physical touch. So you have to explore that a little bit more. Okay, well, what else? So that you kind of, and then
I do think
the easy thing is just take the test.
Well, and honestly, I know reading books is, you know, if I say it, people go, I don't like to read. This book is so full of little gems and little ways. It's the 5 Love Languages book, and he's going to describe for you who you are, and you're going to go, yes, 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 yes. This is me, because it is so thorough. That would be one practical takeaway. If you read or like to read or listen to books on tape, do that. The other practical takeaway would be to take the online quiz. It's not as thorough as the book, but it gets you on the right path, and you will be flabbergasted when you start speaking your spouse's love language, how much of a tone that the change in tone of your marriage will be amazing.
We will put a link to the book, The 5 Love Languages, in the podcast notes, both for you listening in audio form and those of you on the YouTube channel. And as a reminder, every episode of Marriage Talk that we've ever done is available on the website at marriagetalk.org. We are not through with this concept of exploring love languages. And as I mentioned at the beginning, one of the things we're hoping to do is have Dr. Chapman on at some point here down the road. A busy man. And at some point, we think that will happen. Meanwhile, we'll continue along on this journey towards helping you in your happily ever aftering years together again on the next episode of Marriage Talk. Jay and Laura, thanks so much.
Thank you, Bill.